LeighTDickey.com. What's going on, everybody? Leigh Dickey here. Welcome to another episode of Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast. A podcast all about the wonderful world of pro wrestling, where I share opinions, news, we watch promos, matches, and I just give an honest look at the wonderful world of professional wrestling. Now, I'm on the go today. I'm sitting at a park here locally in Toronto, Canada, and I am recording this basically with a dynamic mic with an XLR cable that terminates into a 3.5 millimeter going directly into my phone in an effort to just take this show on the go and see what happens. So I just want you guys to know that, and this is basically just a test show. But with today's episode and this week's episode, I wanted to basically talk about the stigma surrounding being a professional wrestling fan, and I think there is still a stigma. To be quite honest with you, I don't think it'll ever go away. I think it's more accepted now, but I think there will always be that sort of, oh, you're a fan of professional wrestling, therefore you can't be that smart, or therefore, you're stupid, basically. It's dumb, find another hobby and blah, blah, blah. But before we get any further, I want to tell you that the Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, can be found on iTunes, Spotify, my official website, LeighTDickey.com. That's LeighTDickey.com. And wherever you get your podcasts. If you got a podcast app, Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, is there. So you should listen to it. New episodes air Mondays at midnight Eastern Time. That's every single Monday at midnight Eastern Time. And you can follow me on social media. Links are in the description, and they will be plastered everywhere, so you'll be able to find me. So follow me, share your opinions and thoughts on this week's episode, and how you think Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, is going so far. Now that all the housekeeping is out of the way, let's get into the body of the episode, and that would be the stigma surrounding being a pro wrestling fan. And to be quite honest with you, I still think that there is a stigma with being a pro wrestling fan, because certain people are like, oh, you're a fan of professional wrestling, like, why? You're a fan of professional wrestling because you like it. There is something about it that draws you to it. I know for me, like, Hulk Hogan was a big factor, because I started watching when I was really young, sporadically anyway, and Hogan in the red and yellow, eat your vitamins, say your prayers, the fruits and vegetables kind of deal, that was a big thing. Obviously, like, Vince McMahon knew what he was doing. The same thing with Hulk Hogan. Like, he knew how to play to a crowd, and he does have charisma, and he's one of the more charismatic performers there has ever been, along with, say, like The Rock, superstar Billy Graham, and just Stone Cold Steve Austin. I mean, like, the list could go on and on. But when you have somebody like a Hogan with as much charisma as he has, along with, say, like, the promoting power of a Vince McMahon, and the wrestling mind of, say, like a Vince McMahon, and you have the backing of a company like the WWE, of course, like, kids bought that stuff, and why wouldn't they have? Hogan was the biggest thing, and they sold millions of tickets, millions of dollars in merchandise, pay-per-views, and what have you, on Hogan's word, basically, which was really cool. And the thing is, but I think when you're a kid, I suppose that it's more, like, they're not gonna basically rain on your parade because you're a wrestling fan, because you're a fan of, like, Hogan or, like, Macho Man, or even Ted DiBiase, if you were a fan of the heel, like The Undertaker, maybe. They're not gonna, rain on that parade. They're not gonna crap all over it. So if you were on the NWA, like, WCW side, you had Sting, you had Ric Flair, Brian Pillman, maybe. You had all those guys, like, all the guys that were cartoons and over the top and larger than life. And that's what wrestling was when I was growing up in, like, the early 90s. But then as I got a bit older, in the mid to late 90s, they sort of transitioned into the Attitude Era. You got characters like The Rock, you got Steve Austin, you got Triple H, you got The Godfather, and the Acolytes, and Viscera, and not the Dungeon of Doom. Sorry, the Ministry of Darkness. That's what I was getting to. But the stigma is that, like, because you're a wrestling fan, therefore you must be dumb, and it's stupid to be a wrestling fan, just because, like, there's still, I think there was a clip that I saw in the Beyond the Mat documentary. It's probably like right in the opening, I think, where it's like, can you imagine the mind of a person who watches professional wrestling? Like, they can't be that bright, and like, what are they doing? This is ultra violent. And to be quite honest with you, it's all about, like, there is something about wrestling that draws you to it. And with me, it was like, at first, it was Hulk Hogan, because they're over the top. You had people like Randy Macho Man Savage. There was the Ultimate Warrior in there, because it was all about, like, big, cartoonish characters, over the top, larger than life. That's how the early 90s was. And then you got into, like, the 18 to, say, 35 demographic in the Attitude Era. Now, granted, I was still a kid at that point. I was like 9 or 10. Probably shouldn't have been watching at that point, but I was still watching. And I started picking up more during that time period. You had, like, the New Age Outlaws, Badass Billy Gunn, or Mr. Ass, or what have you, the Road Dogg. You had D-Generation X, X-Pac, Triple H. China was in there too. You had D'Lo Brown, Val Venus, The Rock, Steve Austin, Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, Mankind, Dude Love. I think Shawn Michaels came back, like, at the very tail end of that Attitude Era full time. But I know he was the commissioner in the late 90s for a spell. Like, he did shots here and there. And, I don't understand why. Maybe as a kid I didn't understand it, but even as a 30-year-old man, like, why even in 2019, why there's still this stigma? Like, I'm a smart man, I'm intelligent, I find I was a smart kid, I'm a smart adult, and but there's still this, like, I still run into this where it's like, oh, you're a professional wrestling fan. Like, they don't make that much of a big deal out of it now as they used to when I tell people. But, when I was, say, in my teens and in my early 20s, they're like, ew, and they would just, like, avoid me. I remember I was in a coffee shop, and I was, interested in this one girl. But, and she was a performer, much like I am, and I told her, I was a fan of professional wrestling, and she just laughed at me. I said, well, what's the problem with being a fan of professional wrestling? Like, I'm not going to gripe on somebody because they're a fan of Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad, and I'm not a fan of either of those shows, So why gripe on me because I'm a fan of professional wrestling? I like, it's over the top. It's basically a physical car crash with two or more people in a 20 by 20 squared circle with a giant circus surrounding it, and lights. Like, the production value is off the charts. You have things like, the WWE and their production value. AEW is coming up now. Ring of Honor, New Japan, TNA, Impact, whatever they're called these days. And to be honest with you, it's just like the pageantry of it, I guess, for me. And then you have storylines and rivalries between, say, like Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock, or Seth Rollins and Baron Corbin, because they had a spell earlier this year, or like Samoa Joe, AJ Styles. They had memorable runs in TNA, along with Christopher Daniels, who's now in AEW. It's all about, for me anyway, it's just this, I think Paul Heyman put it perfectly, where it was like, these two or more people are fighting, where they're in a rivalry, or there's a problem between them, and they're going to solve it in a ring in a squared circle. Why should I care? I think that was an interview he did with Ariel Helwani, And it's just like, yeah, for some reason, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just the over-the-top characters. Maybe it was the brash attitude of the Attitude Era. But now as I get older, it's just strictly wrestling for me that I enjoy. So like, some of my favorite professional wrestlers are Christopher Daniels. He's right at the top of that list. Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Dean Malenko, a lot of the cruiserweight guys. Like I love Ric Flair, love Dusty Rhodes. Like if you were gonna ask me what my favorite territory was, I'd tell you Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. I think I heard somewhere where Cody Rhodes, his favorite era, say like wrestling or WCW, was the time between 1988 and 1994. I'd take that a step further and say like my favorite era would be between 1988 and say 1997 when it comes to like WCW or like wrestling. I mean, when it came to like the WWE, I'd say the time between I'd have to go with that, like the peak Attitude Era would be my favorite because it left such an impression on me, like the Dudleys and their table matches, and you had the Hardys and the Ladders, and Edge and Christian with the concerto and the 5 seconds of flash photography, which was amazing. The bits that they did with Kurt Angle were off the charts. You know what I mean? It was just fantastic. But I mean, those are just some of the things in wrestling that I like and I harken back to. Like one of my favorite builds to a match, and can you even say rivalry at this point, because they only went, well, I guess they went twice, but I mean, I would say like Hogan Rock at WrestleMania 18, which also happened to be here in Toronto, Canada, at the Skydome, which is now the Rogers Centre. Will forever be known as the Skydome to me, to be honest with you. But you had big matches like Hogan Rock. You had, I mean, there was Hogan Andre, or Steamboat Savage, Steamboat Flair, Steamboat Rick Rude, Flair and Sting. Like, they're just these mythical, like, wrestlers to me, I guess you could say. Yes, they're athletes, but it's almost like they're mythical characters. And the old promotional tactic, or the old way to get over, I think it's still the way you can get over now, is it's just an extension of the actual person with their personality turned all the way up to 11, and it's fantastic. Like some of the best promos I've heard were from Paul Heyman, Randy Savage, CM Punk is one of my favorite promos. Jericho is amazing on the mic, and I could list off a few more, but that's just a handful that I can think of off the top of my head. But the stigma, it really needs to end, I think. I mean, professional wrestling is a thing. It's everywhere. Like, indie wrestling especially is hot again. It's super hot nowadays, with the advent of, say, like, streaming services like Fight TV and even the WWE Network. It's hot. It's everywhere. Like, we have a promotion here in Toronto, Smash Wrestling. They're fantastic. It's everywhere. You can make a living on the indies nowadays, whereas I think you're getting, $50 a shot in the indies when you're starting out, and like if you're lucky, if you're say like a Kevin Nash or a Scott Hall and you're on the indie scene, you're probably making $3,000 a shot, right? But then again, I know like somebody like a Christopher Daniels made his name on the indies, and then was working for TNA, Ring of Honor, and basically anywhere he could, and even in the California independent scene, because that's where he's from. But I just think, like, the stigma needs to really end, where it's like, why would you poke fun at somebody because they like something? It doesn't make sense, in my opinion anyway, right? But then again, like, if somebody's listening to this who's not a wrestling fan, I'd be surprised. But I don't understand the stigma where it's like, because I'm a fan of professional wrestling, or because anybody's a fan of professional wrestling, they're automatically in a lower category. They're on a lower tier. They're on a lower level. They're dumber. It's ridiculous that they're a fan. They really shouldn't be a fan. It's not a plausible thing to be a fan of. Like, you should be a fan of something, not transparent, I suppose, or just something real, as they say. Because people will still come up to me and say, wrestling's fake, right? Yes, I know wrestling's fake. I know it's choreographed. I know it's entertainment, but I still like it. It's the way I get entertained, whether I'm watching Raw, whether I'm watching SmackDown, whether I'm watching old episodes of WCW Saturday Night or World Class or Mid-Atlantic. It doesn't matter. It's something that entertains me, right? So therefore, I don't like being stereotyped or stigmaed for any reason, much less being a wrestling fan. So I'm a wrestling fan. So what? You could be a fan of whatever TV show there is, say like Dancing with the Stars. You could be a fan of Dancing with the Stars. I don't watch it, but I'm not going to harp on you for being a fan. I'm not going to gripe on you for being a fan of Dancing with the Stars. You could be a fan of Survivor. I don't watch it, but I'm like, you like what you like. I remember I was dating a girl who was like, oh, I love Game of Thrones. And I just told her I didn't watch it. Like, I'm not a fan, sorry. And she broke up with me, like, right there. I don't understand, like, why that had to be the way it was, but it was what it was. It is what it is. Like, I'm not a fan of Game of Thrones. I'm not a fan of Breaking Bad. I'm not a fan of Dancing with the Stars. I'm not a fan of Survivor. But I'm not going to, harp on anybody. I'm not going to give anybody a hard time because they're a fan of those shows, right? It's, you like what you like and I like what I like, and I'm never going to waver from that. I'm never going to apologize for being myself. I'm never going to apologize for being a fan of professional wrestling. I'm never going to apologize for being a fan of something that entertains me and that I get joy from. If I enjoy, say, watching John Cena and Roman Reigns go at it, or Brock Lesnar and Seth Rollins go at it nowadays, like, if I enjoy that, I enjoy that. If I enjoy watching AJ Styles and Samoa Joe go at it, or Samoa Joe and Kofi Kingston go at it for the WWE title, or Dolph Ziggler sell his ass off for whoever he's in the ring with, so be it. That's what I enjoy, and that's why I'm a fan of professional wrestling. It is like, I know Jim Cornette's going to hate this, but it is a form of performance art, and I love any sort of artist that plies their craft, does it well, and is successful at it. And if it happens to bring me entertainment and bring me joy, so be it. I like it, and that's the way I like it, right? Whether it's promos, whether it's hype packages, whether it's the in-ring work, I love everything about professional wrestling, and I think it is one of the greatest sports out there. I know it's treated like entertainment nowadays. I think MJF, Maxwell Jacob Friedman, is one of the best heels in the business. Adam Page is poised to be AEW's next breakout star. Like, you still got the WWE, who's basically signing up everybody who's not already under contract to, like, Ring of Honor or AEW or New Japan. Yeah, but, like, wrestling is hot, the indies are hot, and I've always been a fan. Like, whether I'm 220 or 200, I think I will always be a fan, you know what I mean? And side note, like, my favorite match, I probably mentioned this before, is Steamboat Flair from Chi-Town Rumble in '89. I think once I hop off and get back home, I'm gonna throw that on tonight and just sit back, relax, throw my feet up, and enjoy a good, solid, old school wrestling match between two of the greats. But that's basically why I think the stigma behind being a professional wrestling fan, or that comes with being a professional wrestling fan, needs to stop. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast. Again, new episodes of Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast, go live every single Monday at midnight Eastern time and can be found at my official website, LeighTDickey.com, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on social media. Links will be in the description. But again, I'm Leigh Dickey, and I'm signing off. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. You guys have been great. And we'll talk to you all again next Monday at midnight Eastern time for a brand new episode of Pinfall, a pro wrestling podcast. See you later. Peace. ptdickey.com.